So, good evening, everyone. It's a joy to be here this evening. My name is Linford Rank. You can see my name here, Linford. I'm a new attendee and also employee at St. James. Some of you know me, and I have heard of your work here in Contemplative Citizenship, and I would regularly join you, but on Tuesday evenings I'm over in the parish hall, usually, with about 100 of our NA guests who are doing some hard work there, also contemplation and group sharing. So I'm over there just to be a presence and facilities over there. But this evening, Father David needed to attend a vestry meeting downstairs, and so he asked me to fill in and to share this evening with you all. So thank you for being here, and thank you for having me. So this evening, I want to think a little bit about the great historic monastic virtue of stability. So Benedictine monks, as some of you know, took three vows of poverty, of chastity, and stability. That is, stability to live in an intentional community with the rest of the brothers, but also means a commitment to the place or the town, the community where their house or the monastery was. And these were vows of life many times, unless they would happen to be moved to another house somewhere else in their order. And I want to start with a story and thinking about stability and this virtue of stability. Can you all hear me in the back?
Are you saying stability?
Stability, yes, stability. I'm going to start with a story from my life. So Father David said that you shared things about your own life, that you get vulnerable in this on Tuesday evenings. So I recently moved back from Jerusalem, where I'd been living for about a year. I moved back in July. And I had been basically floating all about the Northeast, from Virginia to Boston, looking for a job as a teacher or in a church. And it was a magnificent failure, this job search, since July of the past few months. But in the midst of my kind of sojourning and looking for jobs, I took a retreat at a monastery in Boston. It's the monastery called Society for St. John the Evangelist. And I was reading the book called The Sayings of the Desert Fathers. And I encountered a saying by Abba Anthony, so the great Saint Anthony, who of course is one of the founders of the monastic tradition. And this story was told of Saint Anthony. And I'll just read it, this little paragraph. And I quote, "Someone asked Abba Anthony, 'What must one do in order to please God?' The old man replied, 'Pay attention to what I tell you. Whoever you may be, always have God before your eyes. Whatever you do, do it according to the testimony of the Holy Scriptures. In whatever place you live, do not easily leave it. Keep these three precepts and you will be saved.'" End quote. Should I read it again? Okay, I'll read it again. It's a lovely passage. Someone asked Abba Anthony, "What must one do in order to please God?" And the old man replied, "Pay attention to what I tell you. Whoever you may be, always have God before your eyes. Whatever you do, do it according to the testimony of the Holy Scriptures. In whatever place you live, do not easily leave it. Keep these three precepts, and you will be saved. And as I was sitting in that monastery library, the last precept, where Saint Anthony replies, "In whatever place you leave, do not easily leave it." I thought, you know what? And I had just moved into Lancaster, and I was here for about a week with my brother. And that phrase really stuck out to me. And I thought, you know what? In the kind of transient life of 21st century modern America, at least the America I live in, that I kind of am used to. I spent time in the past 5 years, I think I moved 7 times. Anyways, and I think that's quite normal for folks my age and people of other generations as well. But the phrase, whatever place you live, do not easily leave it. And I thought, I love Lancaster. So I grew up here, I attended Millersville. And so I lived in the area about 10 years ago, and then I left and did other things. And I thought, what if God is calling me to live and really occupy my life as I find it in Lancaster? And what if this is a calling to live here? And so that's what I did. I chose to live here for this season, this kind of semi-jobless season, and really get involved in the relationships and the places and the people that I love here. And to think about this place as an invitation and a place where I seek growth and seek the relationships and the people around me. And I wonder, what if, extended to all of us, what if we are saved, as St. Anthony tells us, in whatever place we are? And I think, this might easily lead into fatalism or into complacency maybe, but, St. Anthony says, do not easily leave it. And I think that's the difference. It's, okay, sometimes we do need to leave a place, of course. And I'm sure all of you have more experience with that than I do. But it's in what if we're so invested in a place, in a town, or a street, or a community, a praying community, that we find it difficult to leave when we need to leave. And that is the word that I received from Abba Anthony at that monastery, and something that I've been living with in the past months. So today, this evening, if we can pray, I will just lead with this mantra, and it's taken from the Lord's Prayer. So the phrase, "Give us this day our daily bread." And as we say it out loud and silently, what does sufficiency look like in our life here at St. James, in my life, and in your life? And then in the monastic language of stability, of seeking and receiving from each other and from the places that we are and from God. What is it that we're being told, we're being shown right where we are in the midst of our daily lives? What is the bread that we are receiving? So please, I invite you to close your eyes, take several deep breaths. And we will close with the Lord's Prayer at the end. Give us this day our daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. Let us say together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Amen. Thank you all for your prayers this evening, for having me, your hospitality. I will now turn it over to Cordelia, who will lead the second session.
Thank you, Linford, for sharing something of your life. Dave and I had the privilege of getting to know Linford when we were in Jerusalem in the summer, and many blessings have followed from that those initial conversations that we had, which we can have another forum meeting about in another time. So tonight we're going to look at chapter 20, and it's called Be as Courageous as You Can. And the little quote that introduces that chapter is, "If none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny." Yes, it's up on the screen. The chapter's wrong, but the page is right and the quote is right. So 2 out of 3. So it's a coincidence that I'm presenting tonight. David has vestry. But it's a happy coincidence for me because if you've looked at that chapter already, the practice that Timothy Snyder suggests that we take on as contemplative citizens is to have a proper understanding of history. And as a historian, I couldn't possibly disagree with that. Last week, you remember, we talked about patriotism, what real patriotism was about. And throughout the week, that word's been popping up in my life, and in connection to St. James. I mean, the obvious connection between St. James and patriotism, of course, is the revolutionary generation, many of whom are buried in our churchyard. But I came across a very interesting connection to St. James and patriotism, which I wasn't expecting this week. As some of you may know, I'm writing a book of essays on the history of St. James at the moment, and the piece of work I'm doing at the moment is about women over 300 years here. And I came across Reverend William Augustus Muhlenberg's valedictory sermon in 1826 to the parish after a sort of perhaps not quite a bitter divorce from the parish, but not entirely a happy separation. And in that sermon, he is extolling the sort of first generation of women's Sunday school teachers. And he says of them, "Your office, however lowly it may look in the eyes of the world, is one of real dignity. It is the purest and most efficient patriotism. Your quiet labour, like a silent yet enriching stream, is really nourishing the soil of the Commonwealth." And what we were talking about last week about real patriotism and where many of us might find ourselves struggling with that issue, I thought that was a really interesting sentiment that he had in the 1820s. The other strange coincidence about tonight, not only me as a historian, of course, is if you follow British politics at the moment, you will know that Britain is now on its third Prime Minister. It's almost Prime Minister of the Month at the moment. The new Prime Minister and his government have to face the economic crisis that is hitting Britain at the moment. Obviously, that owes something to the war in Ukraine. But it's also the effects of Brexit, and I would argue the denial of the effects of Brexit. And Timothy Snyder sort of mentions that in that chapter today. So I connect deeply with that as well. So what does he have to say about history? Snyder believes there are two common narratives, or what we might call historical heresies, that are preventing us from acting to protect and support democracy. The first is what he calls the politics of inevitability, the sense that history can only move in one direction, i.e. towards liberal democracy. And that we have been perhaps picking up on that in the last few decades as we've seen globalization, or we've seen democracy come in parts of the world that it wasn't before, and we've assumed that that was inevitable and we didn't have to do very much about it. And he talks about the politics of inevitability as a self-induced intellectual coma, because in it we believe there is no alternative to the order of things that we see before us. And that even criticism of those sort of social and political norms actually proceed on the basis that they're actually real, because people talk about disruption, which they assume that they can do, and that then the system sort of resets itself and gets back to normal. And he talks about disruption as being a very sort of adolescent sort of view of the world, like we're teenagers who like to make a mess, or other people like to make a mess, and we hope and know that the adults, in quotes, will clear it all up. And I've certainly heard a lot about adult talk in British politics this week, so again, it resonated. So there's the politics of inevitability. But the second historical heresy is what he calls the politics of eternity, which is concerned with the past, and on the face of it looks a much more sort of historically sound view of the world. But he sees that as self-absorbed, and it's often detached from facts. It's a sort of fanciful idea of the past. One of my favourite quotes as a historian is that historians are only as good as their footnotes, which is meant to make most people yawn. But truth in history, and I think in real life, must be built on verifiable facts if it is to be truly true. The politics of eternity, by contrast, long for a past moment that really it never happened, or if it did, it didn't happen quite in the way that people talk about it. And that politics of eternity often sees sort of the nation or a group of people as being sort of besieged by sort of bad people or enemies. But people hold on to a golden age where that wasn't necessarily the case. And he calls that view, says that it dulls the impulse of self-correction if we believe that things are eternal, like the nation, where we are the inherent good guys and everybody else are bad actors. And such thinking, as I was looking at this, I think can infect any institution. It's not just the nation. I think perhaps sometimes in the church we're a little prone to this, of thinking there was some golden age of Christianity, which if only we could get back to, you know, everything would be so much better than 2022 in St. James in Lancaster or in America. And often that golden age is something like the medieval period with its beautiful churches and cathedrals, but which of course factors out things like anti-Semitism or the Crusades or whatever other thing may be going on really in the historical period. Or even the 1950s, where, you know, everybody went to church in America, and, you know, everything was so much better, and that's fine, except, you need to think about women who are excluded from many roles in our society and churches, and, very much a message to children that they should be seen and not heard, with many of the consequences that we're living with today. Snyder, therefore, compares the politics of inevitability to a coma, but the politics of eternity as being hypnosis-like, as it can capture us and make us susceptible to the belief that the ends justify the means. Is that the way around? The means justify the ends, sorry, just to confuse you. Because we are always the good guys in that scenario. So what he calls us to is to having a true orientation to true history, to understand patterns, to understand complexity, and to make judgments, looking very much at the context of the time. And in that vision that he has, he sees us not as passive or in a coma, but actually as co-creators of reality. That's what we really need to be, not just in a coma-like relation to history or to our own society, but really take responsibility as co-creators. And he says, history permits us to be responsible, not for everything, but for something. And I think that's a really profound sentence when we struggle with so much of our history, or we should be struggling with so much of our history. And I think it's such a contemplative practice. It's sort of modest. We can't fix everything, we can't be everything. It's personal, and it has that element of accountability in it as well. And I think that's why he starts the chapter with saying that we need to be courageous, because none of this is easy. I was in a doctor's waiting room this week, and someone had one of those little pieces of wood on a shelf with a pithy little phrase in it, so meant to be encouraging, and it said, "Let your faith be bigger than your fear." And I asked the receptionist whether I could take a picture of that, because I thought I'm going to be doing this week, and that would be a really good another mantra to add to the list. So those are my thoughts on history, being courageous, and what Timothy Snyder seems to be saying about that. And I'd love to hear what you made of it. We all remember we have to do I, me, my language, and it'd be very interesting to see where this connects with your own personal history or your church community, or as Timothy Snyder is asking us to think of it in terms of nation and bigger organisations that we all belong to. So thank you. Yes, if people here could come up to the... We're getting good at this now.
Jed and I were in a dilemma tonight because I received an invitation to a group that has established a movement in the city of Lancaster to oppose Christian nationalism. And it's calling itself Faith, Hope, and Love for the Common Good. And it was a meeting tonight, and I deliberated and responded yes. And then around 6 o'clock, Jed and I were feeling a little sluggish, and I said, I can't deal with that. I'm not ready for that. I'm a very good Democrat, and I've worked very hard in the past for the Democratic Party, but I have put my head in the sand because I don't feel I have the courage to fight this battle again. I've fought it in quite a few presidential elections, and now I know it has to be faith, hope, and love. I know that's what I stand for, and I know I don't believe some of the terrible stuff that's being spelled out in this country. And it makes me very, very sad that there's such division. But I just didn't have the courage to go there tonight. I wanted to be here with my dear friends and to hear Cordelia. So now I'm very happy to be where I am. But there'll be another battle to fight, I know. So one day I will have more courage.
I just wanted to follow up on that, and having read the chapter, I do think that this is a time that's called for courage. But some of us who are more timid than others, and I tend to be, I don't want to do this by myself, is to take a stand with others. And I think we're at a Bonhoeffer moment, if you know what I mean. It's a Bonhoeffer moment who stood up to Nazi Germany and actually started a community, Christian community. I do think that, I mean, having looked at seeing what's happening in our own backyard, just recently with the rise of Christian nationalism, and for one, I've decided to take the courage to form a podcast to discuss this. So I'm interested in the group, joining with others to see what we can do to make a difference.
Thank you, Terry. I think, yes, groups are always a good place to test ideas and to find support. Would anyone like to talk about the mantra and the prayer, or whether they had any insights about their daily bread today, as well as talking about history and courage?
Yes, actually, it's my wife, Rosemary.
Hi, Rosemary.
Hi. I'm still thinking about your words about the history of inevitability, Cordelia, and I'll probably be thinking about that for some time. I recently read a book that helped me understand perhaps why someone would think in a Christian nationalist way, which it's usually helpful to think about how people perhaps come to those thoughts, even if one agrees or disagrees with them. But it might be a book that others have read called Jesus and John Wayne, about the development of some of these ideas within an evangelical tradition. It was written by a woman who is within that tradition and teaches that. And I won't go into the thesis of the book, but she describes how these thoughts were developed in generations of young people. And I was struck by the final sentences in her book, which were, "We have to understand this because it didn't have to be this way, and perhaps it could change." And I think of that when you talk about the narrative of inevitability, that she was staunchly on the side of, this wasn't inevitable. We can understand it. We can try to combat it, but it can be different. Thanks.
Thank you, Rosemary. That's a hopeful contribution, and unfortunately I can't take credit for the politics of inevitability, much as it would be nice to. Linford, could you just read the chat thing out?
Yes. I have considered that the time might come that I would have to give my life for what I believe, but I always thought it would be for my religious beliefs. Now I'm thinking that it might be for freedom in my country. Seems extreme, but feeling more real, scary.
Thank you for that.
So I wanted to share something that...
Yeah, come a little closer. Just
Yeah.
Okay.
And this was an advertisement. This was in the first section of the Sunday paper, last page. I'm trying to look at the page number. But anyway, it was an advertisement put out by the Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren on practicing peace, service, and openness to all. The title is "The Perils of Christian Nationalism." And I can't read it all. But I thought it did a beautiful job of framing it, because I think, at least I think, that sometimes if we feel that we're opposing Christian nationalism, that we may be opposing Jesus. I mean, I think there's that thought, perhaps. But this lays it out that how they've really sort of turned it all upside down and has in no way reflects Jesus' message. But if I may, I'll just read. And if there's a reference point, I was reading here too, it says something, Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren, endorsed and supported by the Lancaster Interchurch Peace Witness. So there's a website to that, and which I haven't explored. But anyway, maybe there's more information. But I'll just read briefly. It says, protecting America's promise, the cost of silence compels us to speak out. We deplore Christian nationalism. Our understanding of Jesus calls us to stand strong for the country we love and for the faith we cherish. We applaud America's promise to protect religious freedom so that every faith is treated with dignity and equality. Anyway, it just hit right home with me in sort of what we were discussing over the.
Thank you. I missed that in the paper, so
Yeah.
thank you. I shall go back and read it.
If you
tonight.
you still have your Sunday paper.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Mike.
It's interesting, that came to our attention because of some friends who had started attending that church, and they pointed out to us at a social event and said, watch out for this coming.
Oh.
And they're a couple about our age, and they also are very dedicated to what Elizabethtown is experiencing tonight, I believe actually, about school board and censorship of books in the schools. So they're in a hotbed of new movements that are very controversial, and I think they're good Christians, they're willing to bite the bullet and be involved in that movement, which is more or less saying some of the finest minds in this area have been lecturing and stating our Christian thought is not what's being represented, not what we were taught. And that's, I think it's very difficult for people to, especially persons who haven't experienced.
Do you want to come up more to the, so that people on the...
My take on it is
Yes.
that people who have not really experienced the deepest of their Christian faith in God and through Jesus Christ are being swayed to some very devious, hateful, hard to see, hard to accept situations. And we're really fighting what I see as the spirit of the devil, and just really fighting for what this country was founded on, which is religious freedom. So I sense that we're being called, 70% of the voting population now feels this is a turning point in this country. This is definitely a turning point. It's the difference between what the nation was founded on and a faction of persons that want to interpret that in another way. And I think we're seeing some pretty tough things happen in these next couple months. We need a lot of courage.
Anyone else want to come in before? Yes, Linford, do
I think
you want Terry?
I was going to talk, but I think Mary Teresa.
Yeah, Terry, yes, you're right.
I just wanted to follow up on what Azita said, because I too feel a sense of real urgency to address what's happening. When I saw in the news that at the Reimagining America, they were baptizing people, I'm thinking, oh, what are they baptizing? I mean, what's happening here? And it's just taking the name of the Lord in vain. And it makes my shackles go up. I don't know whether, and I also have read the book about Jesus and John Wayne. I just feel that if we in the church do not speak up and speak out in any way we can, and I applaud the Church of the Brethren. I saw on a door, just so that is making an impact. I just came from dinner and I saw on the door of an apartment that whole piece from the Lancaster paper posted on the door. So people are waking up, and I think that we need to wake up against the reimagining of America, because that's what's happening. I just wanted to say that I feel as strongly as the rest of you about what's going on here in our country. And I'm not sure if we follow Bonhoeffer, I think it's going to take us to be willing to suffer the consequences of standing up for Jesus.
So I like the language of what Terry used, the word of address, and the way that communities, well, specifically Christian communities, address this Christian nationalism. And I think that language of addressal is really important, as opposed to another response, which I've seen at least, is of dismissal, the temptation to quickly say, well, Christians, this is Christian nationalism, this isn't Christian, too bad. Even I think there was an article about this in The Atlantic, some high-up magazine. I mean, the fact is that, of course, Christian nationalism is not a new thing, and violence and Christianity have been historically intertwined with one another, Christianity and imperialism. And I think the language of address, which is a language I think that I heard from the Church of the Brethren, of saying, we are Christians and we're not dismissing this as something completely foreign to our Christian experience. It's anti-Christian, yes, of course, but it's not foreign. But we are here as well, and we are addressing this problem, I think is kind of what's needed, as opposed to the kind of simplistic, easy dismissal, which is a response I've often also seen of just saying, I don't want any, we're Christians, we're not going to have any part of it. This is not, they're not Christians, they're not, but I think that addressal is what's needed. Anyways, thank you.
Be courageous.
It's not that important. But so I recently, maybe a few weeks ago, listened to a podcast on Christian nationalism. And really, I forget some of the details, but I know what I felt when I finished listening to it is fear. I felt very afraid, and that it's quite powerful and bigger than I thought. So it makes me realize that I need to be paying more attention. I don't know what it means to address it. I really don't. But nonetheless, I felt fear, and I hope to learn more about it so I don't feel so afraid and rather can address it in some way. That's all.
And just following up on that real briefly, so it's funny you mentioned fear, because when I evaluate what some of these messages, and if I feel that it's tied to some fear-based thought, then I personally feel like it's off the track. So I have to evaluate, where is this message coming from? What is it? What's the motivating factor? And anytime it's fear, and we see it in a lot of these messages, then I come to the conclusion that it's off base, and it's no place to be.
Cordelia, I don't know if I had to step out briefly. Did anyone read Mary Bucher's comments today?
Could you read that?
Oh yeah, sure. From Mary Bucher, on November 3rd, there will be a number of events in Lancaster where folks opposed to the tenets of Christian nationalism can be present and speak and show up against this force. And Pam is interested and would like to know more details.
And it's not that we can be pushed for one thing or another. We feel like we've got to make an either-or decision, but that is not the case. Our options are open. We can be flexible in what we do, and maybe one thing that we can accept and say, that's good, and then something over here we can say, I think I like that too. But we live in now moments, and our history has to be as part of our times. This is when our history is made. But in our liberty, in our Christian liberty, we don't have to be coerced into either ors. We can take the middle way. It's a good thing to know.
So just to follow up on the details, I don't know if Mary Buku could put in the details in the chat, or, I mean, I'm also interested. What about for folks who are interested? How did we get connected to this?
There's Mary.
Linford, I don't have it in front of me right now, but I read about it, I'm pretty sure, in the Lancaster paper, that Lancaster was setting up a series of events, and I think the date was November 3rd, if that is a Thursday. It's on a Thursday, the November 3rd, I believe.
I'll look it up. Okay, thank you.
And again, I think it's some kind of a bus tour type thing, and it's named very positively, like hope, peace. I don't know what all the words are, but anyway, that it's basically counter and over against this Reawakening America tour that showed up at Spooky Nook and has been going across the country and so forth.
Okay, great.
But I can't give it to you right now because I just got back from being away and I don't have my newspapers right yet.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for participating online and here. Another event, which one can see as Contemplative Citizenship, is coming up on November the 5th, is when we have the bridge dinner with refugees, people who have recently arrived in Lancaster, and that's a way of showing our values and our Christian discipleship in a small but very significant way of making connections with a new group of Americans, which I hope to join actually next month because I have my interview. So, I might need to have some briefing on sports teams, and I might be good on the history, but not necessarily on the other citizenship questions. So, any tips or advice would be gratefully received. So, bridge dinner and prayers for me next month. So, thank you so much for this evening, and look forward to gathering again next week. Thank you. Goodbye.